Imagine, it's the dead of winter. The snow is falling hard outside, the wind howls against your windows, and the world is silent. Too silent. You're wrapped in a blanket, thinking you're safe, warm, untouched by the night. But out there, beyond that frozen darkness, lies something far more terrifying than the cold. Winter has always been more than just a season. For centuries, people whispered that the snow covers more than just the ground. It hides screams, footsteps, and shadows that don't belong. Stories of travelers disappearing on icy roads, cabins deep in the woods, where voices echo long after the fire dies, and of creatures, things that should not exist, lurking in the whiteout, waiting for those foolish enough to wander too far. Tonight, you'll hear 10 terrifying true winter horror stories. Each one colder, darker, and more disturbing than the last. These aren't just campfire tales. These are real experiences, told by those who survived them. And trust me, by the time the final snow falls, you'll be looking at winter nights very differently. So, before we begin, make sure you're ready. Pull your blanket tighter, and if you dare, hit that subscribe button to Scary Dark Narrations so you never miss the stories that keep you awake at night. Because out here in the freezing dark, fear isn't just in your head, it's waiting outside your window. I was 23, a college student just trying to stretch every dollar. And it happened about a month ago, right when the sharp edge of winter was beginning to bite. Most nights during our college break were quiet, but I'd been killing time with DoorDash runs, making a little cash to keep myself busy. Earlier that day, I had already done a few hours, but by evening boredom crept in and pushed me back behind the wheel. It was around 9 when I got the ping for a large order to full bags. Heavier than most, and I thought, easy money, why not? The drive wasn't unusual at first. The GPS guided me through a typical suburban neighborhood, winding streets lined with houses glowing with porch lights and holiday decorations. But the farther it took me, the quieter and emptier things became. The houses thinned out, the lights faded behind me, until I reached the very back of the neighborhood. It looked like a dead end, but the GPS kept insisting, keep going straight. That's when my headlights caught something odd, a small wooden gate tucked to the side, numbers nailed to the wood, and they matched the delivery address exactly. It felt off. None of the other homes had gates, and all of them sat openly along the road. This one looked hidden, like it wanted to stay apart. I pulled over, got out, and pushed the gate. It wasn't locked. It swung open with a slow, creaking sound that seemed too loud in the cold night. Gravel crunched under my tires as I drove down a narrow path lined with trees that swallowed most of the light from my headlights. At the end of the drive stood a single small house, wooden, older than the others I'd passed, with the kind of weary look that told you it had been standing there long before the neighborhood grew up around it. I checked the GPS again. This was the place. My car idled behind me, headlights painting the front of the house. The porch sagged slightly, the wood darkened with age and damp. And what unsettled me most was the front door wide open, yawning into the dark. Yet the house itself was completely unlit. No porch light, no glow in the windows, nothing to suggest life, even though the order was huge, far more than one person would ever eat alone. I grabbed the bags and climbed the steps, each one groaning under my weight. The night air was freezing, but the silence inside was even colder, the kind of quiet that presses against your ears. I crouched to set the food down, ready to retreat, when a voice broke that silence from somewhere inside, low and casual. "Hey, can you bring it up here, buddy?" I froze. The sound came from upstairs. The staircase began just a few feet beyond the front door, but the interior was nothing but darkness. I couldn't see past the first step. My mind tried to rationalize it, maybe someone just preferred the lights off, but unease clawed at my chest. Still, I took one hesitant step into the doorway. My shoes tapped against the floorboards, and the voice came again, clearer, like it was drifting from the top of that dark staircase. "Just bring it up. I'm right here." Something about it was wrong. The tone was almost friendly, but there was no warmth in it. No background noise of a TV, no footsteps, no sign of anyone moving around up there. Just stillness, and that voice coaxing me deeper into the dark. My heart began hammering in my chest. Every instinct screamed that this wasn't right. that stepping any closer would be a mistake I couldn't undo. My fingers tightened around the paper handles of the bags. I wanted to say something back, to ask for proof, but the words died in my throat. Instead, I slowly stepped backward, never taking my eyes off the black stairwell. Then I lowered the bags carefully onto the porch. The air inside the house felt too heavy, thick with something I couldn't explain. As if the darkness itself was leaning forward, waiting. I turned on my heel, hurried back down the steps, and climbed into my car without looking back. My headlights swept across the open doorway one last time. For a fraction of a second, I thought I saw a shape, something tall and still standing at the bottom of those stairs. But before I could focus, I threw the car into drive and sped down that gravel path, the crunch of stones chasing me out of the trees. For the next few days, I kept quiet. I didn't tell friends, didn't post about it, just tried to shove the memory aside like it had never happened. But it stayed in my head, nagging at me in the middle of the night, whispering that I had abandoned something unfinished at that house. Curiosity is a dangerous thing. A few days later, I gave in and looked up the address online. That little wooden house wasn't just odd, it was abandoned. Records showed it had been empty for years, purchased by the state, scheduled for demolition at some point in the future. No one was supposed to be living there. When I read that, my stomach sank. The memory of the voice drifted back, warm and casual. The way someone might sound leaning over a banister, waiting for their food, only there shouldn't have been anyone there at all. That night I barely slept, my thoughts circling the same question. If the house was empty, then who or what had been waiting at the top of those stairs? For days I replayed it, wondering what would have happened if I had obeyed, if I had carried those bags into the dark. The silence of that house still rang in my ears, broken only by that voice. Sometimes I thought I heard it again, faint, calling from another room when I was alone. Just bring it up. Always the same words, always in that same half-friendly, half-unnatural tone. One evening after another long day of deliveries, I sat parked in my driveway with the engine off. The night pressed around me, quiet and still, and when I looked up at the dark outline of my own house, I felt the same chill as I had that night on the porch. I couldn't shake the thought that maybe I hadn't really left whatever was in that house behind. Maybe when I turned my back and ran, it had followed. Strange things began happening after that. My phone would buzz with a DoorDash order, but when I opened the app, there was nothing there. Sometimes I'd wake up to find the app open on my screen anyway, showing that same address, glowing in the dark. And worse, sometimes at night, just as I was drifting off, I'd hear footsteps creak faintly across the floor above my room, even though I lived alone. I told myself I was imagining it, but deep down I knew I wasn't. The same icy weight would press against my chest each time. The same suffocating stillness I'd felt in that house. I began leaving lights on through the night, every room bright, as if light alone could keep the voice at bay. But light can't hold forever. A week later, I woke to find the bulbs in my living room had all gone out at once. I stood in the doorway, heart racing, as the silence of the house closed in on me. Then from the top of my own staircase came the sound I had prayed never to hear again. That voice, smooth and casual, drifting out of the darkness. "Hey, can you bring it up here, buddy?" The words slid down my spine like ice. I stood frozen at the bottom step, staring into the same kind of black void I had seen in that other house. My throat tightened, my body refusing to move. And then came the sound of slow, heavy footsteps, descending one by one. Careful and deliberate, as though whoever was up there was taking their time. I ran. I bolted out the front door and didn't look back until I was in my car, fumbling with the keys, my breath ragged. The upstairs window was dark, but I swear I felt eyes on me, watching from behind the glass. Now I can't deliver at night anymore. I can barely stay in my own house once the sun goes down. I don't know what I brought back from that abandoned place, but it's here with me, waiting. And sometimes, late at night, when the world outside is silent, I hear that same voice again, closer this time, whispering from the top of my stairs. Always the same words, always patient. Just bring it up. It's strange how some nights can carve themselves into your memory, refusing to fade no matter how much you try. That night, I was working the graveyard shift at the town's old bowling alley, a place that had been around long before I was born. It wasn't fancy, just a rundown building with worn carpets, flickering lights, and machines that rattled like they were about to give up at any second. But in a town this small, it was the only spot open 24/7, so people tolerated its flaws. I, on the other hand, was stuck there because I needed the paycheck. That December night, a snowstorm had rolled in, swallowing the town in thick white silence. It's a kind of storm where the wind howls against the windows, and you know no one sane is going to risk the roads. I clocked in at 10, already dreading the long stretch of emptiness ahead. By midnight, the building was dead silent. Not a single customer had shown up. I swept the lanes, wiped down the counters, and left just one lane, lit like some small invitation for anyone crazy enough to wander in. I leaned against the window at the front, staring at the empty parking lot. Snow was piling high, untouched by tire tracks, so thick it looked like the world beyond was just erased. The storm wasn't letting up, and without security cameras or a manager breathing down my neck, I let myself sink into the chair by the window. The neon open sign buzzed faintly above me, the only reminder that this forgotten place still functioned. Hours bled together as I stared out at the storm. The monotony pressed down on me until I started to drift. Then came the sound. A sharp, heavy thud from somewhere deep behind the lanes. It was so sudden that my heart lurched against my ribs. I sat frozen for a second, trying to convince myself it was nothing, just the old machinery kicking on, or maybe snow sliding off the roof. But it had been too deliberate, too heavy. Against my better judgment, I forced myself to move. I grabbed the ring of keys off the counter and pushed through the swinging door that led into the maintenance hallway. The change was immediate. The warm hum of the front lobby cut off, replaced by a suffocating blackness and the low groan of pipes buried in the walls. The hallway stretched on like a tunnel, lined with pin-setting machines and racks of spare bowling balls. At first, there was nothing but silence. Then, as my eyes adjusted, I noticed something faint on the floor. Footprints. Wet ones. They trailed away from the door, leading deeper into the hall. My stomach tightened as I leaned down, brushing a finger across the damp outline. It was fresh. Whoever had left it had come in after me, maybe only minutes ago. "Hello?" My voice cracked as it carried down the hall. No response. Just the sound of the storm beating against the walls outside. I took a few steps, forcing myself to follow the trail, my shoes squeaking softly on the linoleum. The prints ended at the far wall, where something pale caught my eye. An envelope taped to the bricks. My hand shook as I pulled it free, tearing open the flap. Inside were several Polaroid photos. Gosh, my breath caught in my throat. Every photo was of me, cleaning the lanes, walking across the lobby, sitting in the chair by the window. The last one made me stumble backward. It was taken from directly behind my seat. Whoever had been there had been standing only a few feet away, watching me while I stared out at the snow. The envelope slipped from my fingers, scattering the pictures across the floor. My pulse hammered in my ears, and I knew I wasn't alone. Whoever had taken those photos, they might still be here. I bolted back down the hallway, my footsteps pounding louder than the storm outside. My throat was dry, but I managed to choke out another shaky, "Who's there?" The words bounced back at me in hollow echoes, offering nothing in return. My only thought was to get out, to put as much distance as possible between me and whatever had been watching me. Back at the counter, my hands scrambled for the phone. I dialed 911, every second stretching into an eternity as the line rang. The operator's calm voice on the other end, barely registered I, spat out the address. My voice trembling, and begged them to send someone immediately. The silence inside the alley grew heavier. Every flicker of light overhead felt threatening. Every creak of the old wood beneath my feet sounded like footsteps. I couldn't bear to stay inside. Clutching my coat, I shoved the front door open and stumbled into the storm. Snow and wind swallowed me instantly, but I didn't care. I ran for my car, heart hammering, breath clouding the freezing glass as I locked the doors. From inside, I watched the building. The neon sign buzzed faintly through the swirling snow, casting a sickly glow against the windows. Every shadow behind that glass felt alive. For a long minute, nothing moved. Then just barely I thought I saw something. A dark figure standing at the far end of the hallway behind the lanes. Just a still shape, unmoving, almost blending into the dark. When I blinked, it was gone. The police arrived in minutes, their headlights cutting through the blizzard. Relief flooded me as I waved them down, fumbling out of my car. They searched every corner of the bowling alley, checked the hallway, the back rooms, the supply closets. But there was nothing. No footprints inside except mine, no Polaroids, not even the envelope. Everything had been wiped clean, as if it had never existed. They assured me it was probably a prank. Some local kid who'd slipped in earlier and decided to mess with me. I nodded, pretending to believe it, but deep down I knew better. The photos had been too precise, too close. Someone had been there, watching me for hours, maybe longer. I stayed on at the bowling alley for a few more weeks after that. Every shift, I felt eyes on me. The storm eventually passed, customers came back, and life at the alley seemed normal again. But normal never returned for me, not fully. The night I finally quit, I stayed late to clean up after closing. The last group had left and the place was silent again. As I walked past the last lane, I saw something sitting neatly at the edge of the ball return. A single Polaroid. My breath caught as I picked it up. It was me, taken only minutes earlier, wiping down the counter. The envelope was back, and whoever had been there before, they wanted me to know they never left. It was early March of last year, when winter still clung faintly to the edges of the land. The mornings carried a thin frost that shimmered on the ground, and the air was sharp enough to sting, but not so cold as to keep me indoors anymore. I'd been waiting for this moment, for the first chance to get back to the woods, to the quiet spaces where the world felt untamed. That morning I drove out to a spot I had discovered the previous fall. It was remote, tucked away, forgotten by most travelers, exactly the kind of place I liked best. The road ended in silence, and after leaving my car behind, I hiked for nearly 45 minutes, until I reached a modest campsite. Nothing more than a dirt circle with a commanding view of the forest stretching endlessly below. The sun had just begun its descent when I unpacked my gear. I had always preferred arriving late, setting up quickly, grabbing a simple meal before letting night wash over me. I built a small pile of sticks for the fire I'd light later, then wandered to the overlook, eager to catch the sunset from that high vantage point. The forest beneath me looked endless, dark ridges swallowing the horizon, as if hiding secrets no one was meant to uncover. I was lost in that view when something unusual caught my attention. Through the trees, not far down the slope, I noticed a faint orange flicker. At first I thought it was a reflection, maybe the sun catching the last shards of ice. But within moments it grew clearer, a campfire. It burned brightly in the fading dusk, crackling in the hollow beneath the trees. And yet, what unsettled me most was what wasn't there. No tent, no voices, no movement. Just flames licking upward, feeding hungrily on unseen wood, alone. My stomach tightened with unease. Who lights a fire in the woods and just leaves it? Fires don't sustain themselves, they need tending. They need a hand adding fuel. Someone had been there, someone close. And yet, I heard nothing but the faint whistle of the wind. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe the campers had gone for a short walk, or would return soon. So I stayed at the overlook, watching. The minutes stretched on. The sky bled into darkness, and the fire, instead of fading, seemed to swell. It grew stronger, climbing higher as though unseen hands had been feeding it. My heart ticked faster. I thought about how dangerous it was, how quickly a fire could turn into disaster. Reluctantly, I decided to check it out. I grabbed my flashlight and headed down the slope. The walk was no more than 2 minutes, but each step echoed in the dark, like it belonged to someone else. The woods seemed oddly hollow, and when I finally reached the fire, its crackle was the only sound that existed. It was bigger than I'd realized, flames roaring, logs stacked neatly in a way that suggested recent care. But there was no one there. No tracks in the soil, no signs of movement, just the fire, burning as though it didn't need anyone at all. I hesitated, my light cutting through the smoke, before forcing myself closer. I scooped up handfuls of damp soil and began tossing it over the flames. The fire hissed, spit, resisted me. I worked steadily, heart pounding, until the orange gave way to a dull red glow of smoldering embers. The silence that followed was suffocating, as if even the forest had been holding its breath. I turned back up the slope, eager to return to my camp. But something about it gnawed at me. Fires don't start themselves, they don't feed themselves. And if someone had built this one, where had they gone? When I finally reached my site, the shadows felt heavier. I stuffed my gear into my pack, ready to call it a night, when the sound came. Footsteps, soft, deliberate, somewhere close. I froze. My light swept over the trees, and there just beyond its wreck, I saw the faint outline of someone standing, 50 yards away, still watching. My throat tightened. I forced my voice to stay steady. "Hey, was that your fire down there?" The figure didn't move. "Hello?" I tried again. "I can see you. Can you answer me?" Silence. I packed faster, eyes never leaving that pale outline. It remained there, like a shadow carved into the dark, until I hoisted my bag and began the long hike back. The figure didn't follow, not that I could see. But even as the distance grew, I couldn't shake the weight of its presence pressing against my back. By the time I reached my car, the night was thick around me, suffocating in its stillness. I slid into the driver's seat, locked the doors, and just sat there for a moment, gripping the wheel, my chest heaving. I told myself it was nothing, that the person had probably been another camper, someone who didn't like being confronted. But no matter how I tried to rationalize it, dread lingered like smoke in my lungs. I dialed the local ranger station and reported the fire, stumbling over my words as I explained the strange encounter. They assured me they'd send someone to check, and I should head home. I hung up, started the engine, and pulled away, my headlights carving narrow tunnels through the trees. But the farther I drove, the more the unease grew. My rearview mirror became a trap, my eyes flicking to it over and over again, expecting to see headlights behind me. The road was empty. Yet I couldn't shake the feeling of being followed. An hour later, I finally reached home. I locked every door, pulled the curtains, and crawled into bed, convincing myself sleep would wash it away. But sleep didn't come easily. Every creak of the house, every distant dog bark, every rustle outside my window made my skin crawl. Days passed. I tried to forget. Tried to write it off as a harmless encounter with a stranger, but unease shadowed me wherever I went. At night, I would wake suddenly, convinced someone was standing in the room. My dreams replayed that silent figure in endless variations, sometimes closer, sometimes moving, sometimes just a whisper away. Then, about a week later, I woke to a faint smell of smoke. My body went cold. I rushed to the window and opened the blinds. At the edge of my yard, glowing faintly in the dark, was a fire. Small, but steady, flames crackling just beyond the tree line. Again, no one tending it. I grabbed the phone with trembling hands, ready to call the fire department when I saw it. A shape standing on the far side of the flames, unmoving, watching. I couldn't breathe. The fire flickered higher, reflecting in the windows, painting the walls of my house in restless orange. My voice wouldn't work. My body wouldn't move. I just stood there, staring back at it, until the shape began to fade into the dark. By the time the fire crews arrived, the flames had already died down, leaving only a circle of blackened earth. They asked me if I'd lit it myself. I told them no. They looked at me strangely, scribbled notes, and promised to patrol the area for trespassers. But deep down, I knew what they wouldn't say. Fires don't start themselves, and sometimes they don't end themselves either. Because even now, months later, I still wake in the night to the faint scent of smoke. And when I dare to glance outside, I swear I catch the shimmer of orange flickering between the trees, always distant, always waiting. And sometimes, when I look long enough, I see the figure still standing there, silent as ever, watching. The winter wind rattled against the house like bony fingers scraping glass. Outside, daylight had already drained into a bruised gray sky, and the world felt muted, sealed beneath ice and shadows. Inside, I was cocooned in my upstairs office, a narrow room lined with bookshelves, and the faint hum of my computer. I'd logged in for my usual shift for PM. To midnight, just another long evening of customer service calls and silence. The first hours passed easily. My headset cradled my ears, the low buzz of voices rising and fading like static. I scribbled notes, clicked through tickets, and even smiled once or twice at some harmless complaint. By 7, I'd taken a quick break for dinner, descending the quiet stairs to warm leftovers. When I came back up, the air felt heavier, as if the house itself had exhaled in my absence. I shut the office door, settled at my desk, and stared at the screen. No new tickets. Just me, the muted hum of the computer fan, and the occasional creak of pipes expanding in the winter chill. Then it came, a sharp noise, sudden and hollow, echoing through the house like a dropped object in an empty room. I froze mid-keystroke, headset halfway off. My heart ticked harder, like a second clock in my chest. Slowly, I rose, padded to the door, and cracked it open. The hallway stretched out, pale and still. No movement, no sound. I stepped out far enough to listen, breath held. But there was only silence, thick and swallowing, like the house had gone deaf. It's nothing, I told myself. Old house, old noises. I couldn't afford to wander too long from my desk anyway. Leaving the door ajar, I went back to my chair, slipped the headset on, and stared at the glowing monitor. Gradually, my heartbeat settled. I forgot. Hours crawled past. The calls slowed, then stopped. Midnight approached. My office light flickered once, a nervous little blink that made the shadows tremble along the walls. It was around 11:30 when the second sound came. This one wasn't loud. It was softer like fabric brushing wood, but it carried a weight that made my skin crawl. I slipped the headset off again. The house felt different now, still silent, but not empty. A faint current of cold air brushed past me, carrying with it the smell of something faintly metallic, like old coins or blood. My gut clenched. Something's wrong. I stood, moved to the hallway, and my stomach flipped. At the far end of the hall, the door to the back stairwell gaped wide open. That door had been shut when I started my shift. I was sure of it. It opened inward, casting a crooked rectangle of darkness across the hallway floor. The silence felt electric. Every hair on my arms lifted as I stared at the open doorway, heart drumming so loud it seemed to echo. That was when I noticed the shadow. Down near the bottom of the stairs, just beyond where the dim hallway light faded, something shifted. A dark shape leaned slightly, like a person pressed back into the blind corner of the stairwell. Not moving, just there, watching. For a heartbeat, I couldn't breathe. My mind tried to force logic into the shape of a coat on a hook, a trick of light. But the shadow swayed, just a fraction, as though it was breathing. I stumbled backward into my office, my pulse hammering in my ears. The door clicked shut behind me, my fingers fumbling for the lock. I turned it and pressed my back to the wood. The room felt suddenly too small, the air thin. My phone trembled in my grip as I dialed for help. Each ring stretched long and thin, like thread about to snap. I kept my eyes fixed on the crack beneath the door, waiting for a shadow to fall across it, waiting for footsteps, waiting for anything. But nothing came. No creaks, no stairs groaning, no breath on the other side. The person on the line spoke calmly, telling me to stay where I was, that help was on the way. Their voice was tinny, far away. In the silence between words, I thought I heard something faint, a whisper, or maybe just the house shifting. Minutes dragged. My screen dimmed, the glow shrinking until it was only me, the faint light, and the lock beneath my palm. The house felt like a lung holding its breath. Then, just as I began to hope whoever it was had gone, I heard it, a soft tap, deliberate, on the other side of the door. One tap, then silence. My throat closed. I wanted to scream, but the sound died in my chest. The tap didn't come again. Blue and red lights finally flickered across the window, thin beams cutting the darkness. Heavy boots thundered up the stairs, voices calling out. When I opened the door, my knees almost gave out. They searched everything, upstairs, downstairs, closets, crawl spaces. No footprints in the snow outside. No sign of forced entry. Nothing missing, nothing disturbed. Just the open stairwell door, still yawning like a black mouth. One of the officers tried to reassure me. Probably a draft, he said, but his eyes darted to the open door like he didn't believe it himself. They left me with the house. I locked every door, every window, sat on the edge of my bed until dawn bled gray into the sky. It's been years now. I've moved since then. New city, new house, brighter walls. But sometimes, late at night, I'll take off my headphones and swear I hear it again, a faint brush of movement, a soft tap. And the worst part isn't what I saw in the stairwell that night. The worst part is what I didn't see. Whatever it was had walked past my office door hours earlier, close enough to hear me breathing, close enough to stand right behind me as I stared at my glowing screen, close enough that even now, I can feel the memory of it leaning in, waiting for me to notice. The cabin was supposed to be my safe place, a cozy retreat tucked in a quiet town just outside the ski resort I visited every winter. The kind of place where silence feels natural, where snow muffles the world until it feels like nothing exists beyond the frozen trees. I'd spent the whole day on the slopes, but by 7 that evening, the wind had sharpened into something almost hostile, and the cold cut through every layer of clothing. I packed up early, thinking of nothing but a hot shower and the comfort of the cabin's fireplace. By the time I settled in, I felt warm, almost weightless. Dinner done, the fire popping gently, and the quiet hum of the heater in the background. It was the sort of night you think nothing can ruin, until I heard it. At first I thought I was imagining things, but no, it was real. The sound of footsteps crunching slowly across the snow, each step deliberate, heavy, dragging closer and closer to the door. They stopped. Right outside, I froze halfway to standing. The silence stretched until I wondered if I'd lost my mind. Then came a knock. It wasn't frantic or polite. It was slow, measured. I didn't want to answer, but something in me insisted. Maybe it was the strange guilt of staying in someone else's property. Maybe I just didn't want to admit to being afraid. Against better judgment, I opened the door. A man stood there. Mid-30s, dark hair, thick beard. He looked startled, but his expression shifted too quickly, like he was wearing a mask of surprise rather than feeling it. "Can I help you?" I asked. His smile felt thin, stretched across his face in a way that didn't quite belong. "Who are you?" he asked back, his voice calm, almost rehearsed. When I pressed him, he claimed the cabin was his for the night, that he had booked it. My stomach tightened. I knew my reservation covered the whole week. His excuse for not having proof was clumsy, half-mumbled. The air between us turned sharp, heavy. I apologized and started to shut the door, but his hand pressed against it, firm enough to stop me. "Just a minute inside," he said, the smile returning, his voice suddenly softer. "It's freezing out here." Everything in me screamed no. I shook my head, whispered another apology, and shut the door with more force than I intended. Silence. I stood there, every muscle straining, waiting. For nearly half a minute he didn't move. No words, no sounds, nothing. Then at last the crunch of snow again, this time moving away. Each step retreating slowly into the night. My heart thudded like I had run miles, even though I hadn't moved an inch. I told myself it was over. Maybe he was confused, maybe drunk, maybe worse, but it was done, right? I tried to convince myself of that, sat back on the couch, turned the TV to some quiet background noise, and distracted myself with my phone. The fire glowed softly, and the storm outside deepened. Hours passed. My body felt heavy with sleep, but my mind wouldn't let go of that man's face, his too quick smile, his hand on the door. Near midnight, I gave in to paranoia. I walked quietly to the window and pulled the curtain back just enough to peek out. The snow was falling harder now, painting everything in silver and shadow. At first I thought the trees were empty, that my mind was just being cruel, but then I saw it. A figure. Standing deep in the tree line, barely visible through the curtain of snow. Still, watching, waiting, my chest locked tight. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, looked again. Was going nowhere at least. I couldn't see him anymore. I didn't hesitate this time. Called the property management. My voice shook as I explained, and to their credit, they didn't dismiss it. Within 20 minutes, headlights cut through the storm, and 2 officers stepped out into the night. I stayed by the window, half hidden, watching. They moved with flashlights, searching. For a moment, it was almost a relief. I thought maybe nothing would come of it. Maybe he had just wandered off into the night. But then one of the beams froze on a shadow moving between the trees. The officers shouted. The figure didn't run. He stepped out from the tree line slowly, calmly, like he'd been waiting for them to notice him all along. That's where part 1 ends. They spoke to him in low voices I couldn't hear, their flashlights catching on the falling snow, painting him in harsh, flickering light. The man didn't struggle. He didn't try to explain. He just stood there, watching, as though the officers were no more than background noise. Finally, they asked him to open the small bag slung over his shoulder. When he hesitated, they took it from him. My stomach dropped when they pulled out the contents. Tools. Not just random junk things. Sharp and heavy. Useful for breaking locks. For forcing doors. What? Nothing about that bag, said Traveler. Everything about it. Said he had been waiting for a chance to get inside. I felt a flood of relief when they escorted him away, trudging through the snow with their flashlights bouncing off the darkness. The night finally quieted. I thought I was safe again. I thought it was over, but the unease never fully left. Even as I locked the doors, drew the curtains tight, and tried to calm my racing mind, a question kept clawing at me. What if I hadn't called? What if I'd just gone to bed, pretending not to see? Sleep came slow, restless, broken. Every creak of the cabin jolted me awake. Every gust of wind rattling the shutters felt like footsteps. At some point, exhaustion won. I don't know how long I slept, but I woke to silence so deep, it felt unnatural.
Ow.
My phone said 3:13 a.m. The fire had burned low, shadows creeping across the walls in uneven shapes. I sat up, uneasy, when I heard it again, the sound that started it all. Footsteps in the snow. Not cautious this time. It's not slow. Closer. Quicker. My breath caught. He'd been taken away. Had seen it with my own eyes. But outside, just beyond the wall, boots crunched in the fresh snow. I grabbed my phone, my hand trembling, but before I could dial, the sound stopped. Pause. Then 3 knocks at the door. Slow, hollow, the exact same rhythm as before. My body locked. Every thought screamed not to move. Not this time. But then, impossibly, a voice called out. His voice, calm, practiced, the same as before. It's freezing out here. Just let me in for a minute. The officers had taken him. They had. I wasn't dreaming. So how was he here again? I backed into the living room, heart pounding so loud it felt like it echoed off the wooden walls. The knocking grew louder, more insistent. You don't want to be alone out here, the voice said, softer now, almost coaxing. The doorknob rattled gently at first, then harder. My phone slipped from my shaking hand, landing on the rug. I scrambled for it, whispering to myself that this wasn't real, that it couldn't be happening. But when I looked back toward the door, I saw something that froze me in place. The firelight flickered just enough to reveal a shadow stretching across the floor. It wasn't standing outside anymore. The shape was inside. Long, impossibly long, cast against the cabin floorboards. I never heard the door open. And to this day, I don't remember how the night ended. The night was so quiet it felt like the world had been put on pause. Snow drifted across the empty road in thin, shimmering sheets, the flakes catching in my headlights like falling ash. My hands ached from the cold even inside the cab, and the heater rattled with that weak, uneven sound old trucks make when you need them most. It was nearly 2 a.m, the time when every stretch of highway feels like a forgotten place. I'd been driving for almost an hour without seeing another car, only the silent traffic lights glowing over empty intersections. I rolled to a stop at a red light, thinking about how good it would feel to crawl into bed. The snow tapped softly at my windshield, and for a second it almost felt peaceful, till a sharp knock shattered it. It was loud, urgent, right beside me. My heart slammed against my ribs as I snapped my head toward the passenger side. A woman stood there, her face pale and damp with melting flakes. She looked like she'd been outside for hours, her hair clinging to her cheeks, her breath fogging the glass in quick, uneven bursts. I hadn't seen her approach. One moment the road had been empty, the next she was there, I rolled the window down a few inches. Her voice came out in a tremble, polite but hurried. She said her car had broken down about a mile back, and she tried to walk but couldn't bear the cold. She asked for a ride, said she lived just another mile ahead. Her hands were red from the frost, shaking as she pressed them together. Something about her eyes, tired, almost pleading, made me unlock the door without thinking twice. She slid in, her coat stiff with ice. "Thank you," she murmured again and again, like she was reciting it. I started driving, glancing at her only in quick flashes. Her hair looked darker now, wet and stringy, clinging to her shoulders. The cab smelled faintly of snow and something else like damp wood, old basements. A couple minutes later, she directed me to turn into a neighborhood I'd never entered. I passed it every day, but never had a reason to drive through. The houses that lined the narrow road were small and sunken, their roofs sagging under the weight of snow. Some windows glowed faintly with weak yellow light, but most were dark, like hollow eyes watching us pass. The road dipped and twisted, unplowed snow deepening beneath my tires. My truck groaned as the wheels sank into the powder. I slowed down, gripping the wheel tighter. "This okay?" I asked. She hesitated, her lips parting like she was about to protest. Then she smiled, quick and too bright, and said, "Just a bit further." Something in her tone made me falter. It was polite but sharp at the edges, like a hidden blade. I looked ahead at the unlit road. Snow swirled in the beam of my headlights, hiding whatever lay beyond. "I don't think I should go further," I said. "Road's bad." She turned her head slowly toward me. "It's not far," she said again, softer but firmer. Her hands were clenched together in her lap now. She almost sounded like she was trying to soothe me or convince me. I shook my head. "I'm sorry. This is as far as I can go." She stared at me for a long second, her eyes unreadable. Then she nodded once, opened the door, and stepped out into the snow. "Thank you," she said quietly, but the words sounded different now, heavier somehow. I watched her walk off a few steps and vanish into the flurry, her shape swallowed by the dark. I exhaled, hands still tight on the wheel. Something about her reaction didn't sit right. I'd gone out of my way to help, but she hadn't even looked back. As I started a slow 3-point turn, my headlights swung across the street and froze on something I hadn't noticed before. Down the road, just at the edge of the tree line, stood several shadowy figures. They were motionless, their outlines blurred by the snow but unmistakably human shapes. My stomach dropped. That was exactly where she'd wanted me to drive. For a moment, I couldn't move. The figures didn't shift or wave or call out, they simply stood there as if waiting. My headlights caught pale glints where their eyes should have been, like the glassy reflection of animals at night. The snow thickened, muting everything until the world felt sealed inside cotton. I slammed the truck into gear and finished the turn with clumsy, jerking motions. My heart pounded so loud it drowned out the engine. Soon as my tires gripped the clearer part of the road, I pressed the gas, but the truck felt heavy, sluggish, like something was holding it back. I glanced in the mirror. Nothing but swirling snow. The neighborhood behind me fell away, the rows of decaying houses fading into shadow. But the unease didn't lift. A part of me felt like something was still inside the cab, even though I was alone. The passenger seat was empty, but the faint, damp smell lingered. Stronger now, wet. Wood, old basements, and something metallic beneath it. I reached for the radio just to hear another voice, any sound that wasn't my own breathing. Static hissed back at me. My hands trembled on the wheel. I told myself over and over I'd done the right thing. I hadn't driven further. I hadn't put myself at risk. Yet the memory of her eyes when she stepped out calm, almost expectant, kept replaying. The main road was only a few hundred yards ahead when the truck jerked. The lights flickered. My stomach flipped as the cab dimmed and brightened again. Then, faintly, from somewhere behind me, came a sound. It was soft at first, uneven breathing, like someone who'd run far in the cold. My grip tightened. I told myself it was the heater, the old vents wheezing. But the sound grew louder. I didn't turn around right away, my eyes locked on the road, but my peripheral vision caught a shifting darkness in the back seat, a ripple where there should be nothing. The smell turned sharp, like frost and old iron. My pulse hammered so hard it hurt. Slowly, against every instinct, I turned my head toward the rearview mirror. For a heartbeat, it showed only the empty seat. Then the reflection flickered. She was there, sitting in the back, her head tilted at an unnatural angle, wet hair clinging to her face. Her eyes weren't pleading anymore. They were hollow, dark, fixed right on mine. The truck lurched again. I stomped the gas. Snow spat out from under the tires as the road straightened into the highway. The figure in the mirror didn't move, but I could feel the weight of her stare pressing against the back of my skull. I whispered, "Please," though I didn't know what I was begging for. Then, as abruptly as she'd appeared, the sound stopped. The smell thinned. The mirror showed only an empty seat again. My chest ached from holding my breath. I drove without stopping until the lights of a gas station appeared like a beacon. I pulled in, killed the engine, and sat there in the silence. My hands left damp prints on the wheel. The passenger seat was still wet, a faint outline of where someone had sat. I turned to look fully and my heart stopped. The door was open. Snow drifted in across the floor mat. And in the white frost on the inside of the window, written by a finger I hadn't seen move, were 5 words: "You should have gone further." Snow drifted down in soft, whispering flakes, the kind that muffle a street until the whole world feels padded and far away. My apartment was a small, old 2-story house at the edge of town creaky stairs. Uneven floors, but warm enough once the heat kicked in. After a long day at work, I'd cooked a simple dinner, washed the dishes, and collapsed into bed. Everything about the night seemed ordinary, but a subtle wrongness was hiding under the quiet. Somewhere past midnight, a sound dragged me out of sleep. At first, it was faint like the groan of old wood under weight. Half awake, I told myself it was just the roof shifting under snow. But then it came again, louder, a sharp creak right beneath the bedroom floor, the kind that vibrates up through your bones. My eyes opened fully. The room was dark, except for the weak glow of the streetlight pushing through the curtains. For a moment I didn't move. I listened. Silence, but heavy, expectant. My first instinct was to roll over and pretend I'd imagined it. Yet something in me, an old animal instinct, whispered that ignoring the noise would be a mistake. Without switching on the lamp, I swung my feet to the cold floor and stood up. The house was still. The radiator hissed faintly, the wind hissed softer. I slipped out of the bedroom, padding barefoot down the short hallway, careful not to make the boards squeak. The spare room was closest. I eased its door open. My old treadmill and free weights were stacked in the corner, casting bulky shadows in the dim light. The air smelled faintly metallic from the dumbbells. I tilted my head up, scanning the ceiling for a leak, but it was dry. The walls didn't tremble. The only sound was my own breathing. For a second, I wondered if the snow outside had stopped completely, if maybe the whole world had. Curiosity pushed me to the window. I parted the curtain with 2 fingers. The street below was a pale blur, street lights glowing like faint ghosts through falling flakes. Still snowing, but lightly. My heart slowed a little. Maybe the creak had been a branch sliding off the roof. I almost convinced myself of it. Almost, because something about the silence of the house felt too full, as if it were holding its breath. I moved to check the other room down the hall. When I opened the door, the smell changed, faintly damp, like wet earth. I stepped in, and my foot sank into something cold. The carpet. Wet. My stomach tightened. I looked up at the ceiling, expecting a leak, but the plaster was dry. Not a single drip. I reached for the light switch and flicked it on. The room jumped into focus. Across the beige carpet ran a string of wet spots, irregular and dark, stretching from the window to the doorway like footsteps, but smudged. 12, maybe more. My breath hitched. I stepped back into the hall, eyes locked on the trail as it disappeared toward my bedroom. A prickling ran up my neck, slow and electric. Everything inside me said, "Don't go in there." But I stood frozen, staring down the dim hall at the half-open door to my room, where the dark swallowed the last damp mark. The only sound was my pulse hammering in my ears. My apartment, which had always been my refuge, felt suddenly alien, like a set from a dream where doors lead somewhere else. I took one hesitant step backward, then another, my heels squeaking on the floor. The quiet of the house seemed to grow heavier with each breath. I could almost hear something waiting just beyond my sight, something crouched and still, patient. I bolted. The decision wasn't even conscious, my body moved first. One moment I was staring at the wet trail, the next I was sprinting down the hall toward the kitchen. The old house vibrated under my feet, each board a muffled drum. I snatched my keys off the counter, my hands shaking so badly the metal jingled like tiny bells. The front door's deadbolt stuck for a heartbeat too long. In that heartbeat, I had the vivid, irrational image of something rushing up behind me, wet footprints, long fingers, breath on my neck. The lock finally turned, the door swung open, and the icy night air hit me like a slap. I stumbled outside in nothing but a hoodie and socks, snow biting at my toes. My car sat under a thin white sheet. I jammed the key into the ignition, started the engine, and reversed out of the driveway, tires crunching through snow. Only once the house shrank in the rearview mirror did I dare glance back at it. The upstairs window, my bedroom window, was open, just a crack, a sliver of black against the glow of the street lamp. I didn't remember leaving it that way. I drove 4 miles, not thinking about where I was going, just away. The snow blurred the road, hypnotic, like static on a dead TV channel. Every so often I imagined I saw a figure on the shoulder of the road, a shadow turning its head as I passed, but when I blinked it was gone. My phone vibrated on the passenger seat, but I didn't pick it up. At dawn, my friend met me at a diner on the edge of town. She called the police for me. When they went to check the house later that morning, they found nothing. No footprints outside in the snow, no wet carpet, no sign of forced entry. My bedroom window was shut and locked from the inside. But the damp smell lingered in my clothes for days, a faint earthy scent that wouldn't wash out. Sometimes when I think back to that night, I imagine what would have happened if I'd followed the wet spots all the way into the room, if I'd turned on the lamp and seen who or what had left them. The creak I heard could have been a window opening, or it could have been something heavier stepping onto the floor. And then I remember how close the last wet mark was to my bed. A foot, maybe 2. Close enough that whatever it was had stood there looking down at me as I slept. Weeks have passed. I've moved into a new apartment on the opposite side of town. Different street, different locks. Yet some nights, just as I'm falling asleep, I'll hear it again, a single creak in the floorboards, weight shifting in a place that should be empty. I tell myself it's nothing, the building's settling. But last night, when I woke to the sound, my socks were damp. The storm outside howled like something alive, rattling the windows and pressing icy fingers against the glass. Snow swirled so thick it blurred the world into a white void, and even the faint glow of the streetlights had vanished. By nightfall, the house felt like an island adrift in a frozen sea, cut off from everything. I'd called off work hours earlier, driving was impossible, and instead wrapped myself in a blanket on the couch. The blizzard's low roar filled every corner of the room, a steady, muffled heartbeat of winter, and I let it lull me into an uneasy half-sleep. At some point, without realizing, I drifted off. A single sharp cough snapped me awake, not a creak or a branch hitting the siding, but a human sound, wet, deliberate, startling. My eyes shot open into pure blackness. Power had died while I slept, leaving the house silent, except for the storm battering the walls. That cough, though, it had been close, too close. For a moment I held my breath, straining my ears, but the blizzard muffled everything. My heart began to hammer, and a strange cold crawled up my arms that wasn't from the draft. Someone was outside. I pushed off the blanket and crept to the front window. Beyond the glass, the storm churned in blinding sheets. I couldn't see the driveway, the trees, or even the porch, just endless, restless white. No footprints, no shapes. My own reflection in the pane looked ghostly, pale, eyes wide. I stayed there, waiting for another sound, but nothing came. Maybe I'd imagined it. Maybe the wind had tricked me. I turned back toward the couch, trying to shake off the unease, when something flickered at the edge of my vision, a subtle shift of shadow down the hallway. My muscles locked. In the blackout, the hallway looked impossibly long, like a tunnel stretching deeper than it should. I fumbled for the wall switch, flipped it on. The bulb hummed weakly but held, casting a thin cone of yellow over the carpet. Is someone there? My voice cracked against the storm's muffled roar. No answer. Adrenaline surged like ice water. Every instinct screamed to run, but outside was a deadly whiteout. Inside might hold something worse, yet I had nowhere else to go. Step by step, I edged down the hallway, forcing my breathing to stay quiet. The old house popped and groaned under the wind. Halfway down, a faint tapping began irregular, like knuckles drumming on wood. Then 3 heavy thumps. My pulse pounded so loud it drowned the storm. A sudden rush of freezing air whipped past me, making the lights flicker. I turned the corner and stopped cold. At the far end of the room, the window gaped wide open, snow swirling in, curtains thrashing like frantic hands. The floor beneath was wet, speckled with clumps of melting snow that trailed inward. Someone had been inside, maybe still was. I lunged forward, slammed the window shut, and twisted the latch with trembling fingers. The storm's roar dulled to a low moan. My breath came in ragged clouds. I spun around, scanning the corners, expecting movement. Nothing. Only the storm's muffled pulse outside and my own thundering heart. Somewhere deep in the house, a floorboard creaked. The room suddenly felt too small, too silent. Whoever or whatever had opened that window could still be here, hidden. My mind raced with every possibility. My phone was on the coffee table, back in the living room. If I ran for it, would I make it before something stepped out of the dark? I forced myself to move. Each step toward the living room felt like walking through a nightmare where distance stretches and air thickens. Shadows trembled along the walls, distorted by the weak flicker of the emergency lamp I'd grabbed. The storm outside pressed harder against the windows, as if listening. My phone screen glowed faintly on the table ahead. Another cough, this one softer, but unmistakably inside the house, rose from somewhere behind me. My knees nearly buckled. I spun around, lamp shaking in my grip, but the hallway was empty. Mold dripped onto the hard wood like faint footsteps. My fingers found the phone and dialed 911, whispering into the receiver. Static hissed back. The line was dead. A floorboard creaked upstairs. Then another. Slow, deliberate. Someone was moving just above me. The house had always felt small, but now it was a maze of blind corners and black doorways. I crept to the bottom of the staircase, lamp beam trembling over the steps. Who's there? My whisper cracked into a shout. No answer. Only the steady crunch of steps overhead, circling. The storm outside dimmed for a heartbeat, a false lull. The quiet felt heavier than the noise. Then, from the top of the stairs, a shape appeared. Not clear, not solid, but darker than the dark. It paused as if listening. The sound of slow breathing filled the stairwell, though I couldn't tell if it was mine or its. My lamp flickered once, twice, then went out. In that instant, the house seemed to shrink. I bolted toward the kitchen, fumbling for the back door. The knob turned, but stuck. Snow had drifted high against it from outside. My breath came in short gasps. Behind me, faint dragging sounds crossed the floor. The temperature plummeted. I stumbled into the pantry, shutting the door softly, pressing my back to the shelves. My heart thudded against my ribs. Through the thin wood, I heard footsteps enter the kitchen, slow, searching, pausing. Something brushed the pantry door, then retreated. Silence stretched like a held breath. For a moment, hope flared. Maybe it was gone. Maybe I'd imagined everything, but the door handle twitched. Not a full turn, just a subtle testing, as if a hand with too many fingers were feeling for the right grip. I clamped a hand over my mouth, tears stinging my eyes. The handle stilled. Footsteps retreated toward the hallway. The storm howled again, louder, almost a scream. I seized the chance, shoved the pantry door open, and sprinted for the front door. My bare feet slipped on wet wood, but I reached the lock, twisting it open. A blast of snow hit me like a wall. I stumbled onto the porch, blinded by white, but at least it was open air. Behind me, from the darkness of the house, a voice rasped low, broken, but close enough to brush my neck. You left the window open. I spun, but the doorway was empty. The voice had come from everywhere at once, welled around me, swallowing the porch, the trees, the world. I staggered into the blizzard, disoriented, running without direction. When I finally glanced back, the house stood dim and silent, windows dark, door ajar. A shadow moved in the upper window, a tall outline watching, still as a statue. I kept running until the cold burned my lungs and the house vanished into the storm. But even now, nights later, when the wind rises, I swear I hear that same broken cough just outside my door, waiting for me to fall asleep again. I was 28, living alone in a small house tucked into a quiet suburban street. Nights were my sanctuary. Beyond my backyard stretched a massive forest, hundreds of miles of dark trails and silent canopies. In daylight, the woods felt alive in a gentle way, like the heartbeat of my town. But at night, when the air thinned and the cricket's song flattened into a single tone, it became something else. That's when I loved it most. I'd slip on my headlamp and wander the paths, the crunch of gravel underfoot echoing in the stillness. It felt private, as if the forest and I had some agreement. That night around 8, the air hung still and mild, the kind of night where sound travels too far. I zipped my coat and stepped into the darkness, feeling the familiar calm creep over me. The trail was empty, just how I liked it. My light cast a narrow beam ahead, cutting through the trees, while everything else blurred into black. My breaths grew steady. Footsteps, steady. Silence pressing in from all sides. Then a sound. Not loud, but wrong. A faint rustle off to my left, like something shifting in the brush. I stopped mid-step. The forest around me stopped too. My lamp trembled slightly as I raised it. The trees bent inward here, and for a second I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me until I saw it. A figure, small, still. A child? Maybe 8 or 10 years old, standing a few yards off the trail. They weren't moving, just watching. No jacket, no flashlight, no sound. The light from my headlamp didn't reach their face, just the outline of a small frame swallowed by shadows. I felt my gut tighten. It was late. No houses this deep.
Nice.
No reason for a kid to be here. Hey, are you okay? My voice cracked the silence. The trail's back this way. Nothing. The figure didn't shift. Right. I stepped closer, careful, my boots crunching softly. It's not safe out here at night, I said, louder this time. Still nothing. The quiet around us became heavier, like the woods were holding its breath. I hesitated. Go get help, or keep trying. The idea of leaving them alone in the forest felt wrong. So I took a few more steps off the path. The ground changed under my feet, soft, uneven. Let's head back. I tried again. I can help you. This time, the figure moved. Not toward me. Backward. Smooth, deliberate, as if urging me to follow. They stayed just within sight, retreating deeper into the forest. The beam of my headlamp stretched thin as I followed, every step pulling me further from the safety of the trail. Minutes blurred. My own breathing filled my ears. The trees grew thicker, twisting overhead until the sky disappeared completely. Ahead, the figure slipped behind something, a dark shape rising out of the ground. My steps slowed. An old shed. Weathered wood, half-collapsed roof. No windows, just a door slightly ajar. It looked abandoned, but in that moment it felt alive, like it had been waiting. I could almost feel the chill leaking from it. I moved closer, heart thudding. Hey, my voice cracked. Come out, it's okay. No answer. Then the footsteps, not the child's. Heavy, slow, measured. Coming from behind the shed, each step sinking into the earth like weight pressing down on my chest. The sound reached me before the shape did. I couldn't breathe, killed my headlamp instantly, plunging myself into darkness. For a heartbeat, the forest held me. Then my body moved on its own, turned and ran. Branches clawed at my coat as I barreled through the dark, every sound amplified, the rush of my breath, my heartbeat pounding in my skull. The heavy footsteps behind me never quickened, but they didn't stop either, like they were just following. I stumbled back onto the trail, my legs burned. I didn't stop until I burst into my backyard, slammed my door and locked it, my chest heaving. Hands shaking, I dialed 911. The operator's voice was calm, routine. No reports of missing kids. Still an officer drove out. I led him back along the trail, my nerves stretched thin. The night air felt heavier now, like it remembered me. We walked in silence for what felt like forever, the officer's flashlights sweeping across the trees. My stomach turned as the forest opened into the clearing. The shed was there, just as I'd seen it, gray boards splintering, leaning like an old gravestone. He pushed the door open. Inside, empty. No child, no footprints. Nothing but a damp smell and rotting wood. The officer glanced at me with something between pity and suspicion. "Old structure," he said. "Probably nothing." But his voice had an edge, like he didn't fully believe it either. We left, but my head stayed behind. The sound of those heavy footsteps still vibrated under my skin. Weeks passed. I tried to convince myself it was all a misunderstanding, a stray kid, an echo, my nerves making shapes out of shadows. But then I heard the news. The city had sent a crew to dismantle the shed. It wasn't supposed to be on public land, they said. Simple cleanup. But something went wrong. Rumors spread fast in small towns. One worker told a friend who told someone else. By the time it reached me, the story had warped, but the core stayed the same. They'd found something inside. It's not new, old. Evidence tied to some unresolved case, buried decades ago. Something no one wanted to talk about. The details never came out officially, just quiet updates, closed-door meetings. A section of the forest sealed off temporarily with tape. No answers. But at night when the wind comes from the woods, I swear I can smell the damp rot of that shed drifting through my open window. I still walk the trails sometimes, but never past the first bend. I keep my light low. I don't linger. Yet sometimes, just before the trees swallow the sky, I think I see movement between the trunks, small, still. Watching it, stands where the shed used to be. I can almost hear the faint crunch of heavy footsteps just beyond the edge of my light, pacing me, waiting. I don't know if it was a setup that night. I don't know if the child was real. Deep down, I think it wasn't meant for me to see. Like the forest had cracked open just enough to show me a glimpse of what it hides. And whatever it was, it hasn't forgotten. The winter air outside the station clawed at the glass like something alive, a constant hiss of wind and sleet pressing against the windows. Inside, the hum of the refrigerators and the faint smell of coffee were the only signs of warmth. My shift was always quiet after the holidays, but this night felt different, like the silence had weight. I'd been there since 9 p.m. And by midnight the snow had built up in drifts that glimmered under the pale parking lot lights. 10 degrees and falling. Could feel it even from inside, a kind of cold that belonged in empty places. The door chime jolted me. I hadn't heard any tires crunching on snow, no engine shutting off, just that sharp ding and the hiss of air as someone stepped in. A man in a heavy coat stopped just inside the doorway. Didn't brush off snow, didn't move toward the aisles, didn't even really look at the merchandise. He stood with his back to the door, head slightly tilted, eyes fixed on the glass, like he was waiting for something only he could see. "Hey there," I said, voice too loud in the quiet. "How's it going tonight?" He turned his head, slowly. His face was pale in the fluorescent light, and his lips pressed into a polite, thin smile. "Fine," he said. "Just waiting for my ride. Needed to keep warm." His voice was soft, flat, like a recording of someone else's words. I nodded. "Yeah, no problem. Take your time." It wasn't unusual for people to duck in during bad weather. But there was something about him, his stillness, maybe, or the way his eyes kept flicking to the parking lot. The glass doors reflected his face back at me. It looked almost gray against the backdrop of swirling snow. I tried to stay busy, stocking gum packets, straightening chip bags, filling the coffee station. Every time I glanced back, he was still there, hands tucked deep in his coat, feet planted like roots. Minutes crawled by. The snow thickened, erasing the tire tracks from earlier customers. At one point I offered the phone, but he shook his head without looking at me. His lips barely moved. An hour passed. No car pulled up. No footprints led to the highway. Just him, silent, eyes on the dark glass, as though something was staring back at him. The wind rattled the doorframe. The heaters coughed. I kept telling myself it was nothing, just a guy stranded in the cold, but a low unease was starting to creep in. When I ducked behind the counter to check my phone, I could feel his gaze even through the shelves. When I looked up, he was already watching me, his face blank, eyes rimmed with a kind of sunken fatigue that made me think of people who had guaranteed slept in days. The door chimed again, but this time no one entered. It was just the wind, or maybe the heater kicking off, or maybe something else. I swallowed hard and tried to focus on the screen of my phone, but my thumb hovered without scrolling. The store felt too quiet.
Out.
Even the hum of the refrigerator sounded distant. Then, out of nowhere, headlights sliced through the glass. A car eased up to the front door and idled, engine low but steady, exhaust curling into the snow. My stomach tightened. I'd been staring at an empty lot for hours, and now this. I looked back at the man, hadn't moved except for his eyes, which flicked to me, then back to the car. His expression didn't change. Without a word, he opened the door and stepped out into the cold, walking toward the vehicle as if this had been the plan all along. The driver rolled down the window, and they began speaking in low tones I couldn't make out. The way the man leaned in, the way the driver's head moved side to side, there was something rehearsed about it, like a signal. My gut twisted. The wind picked up, rattling the glass. I hovered at the edge of the counter, unsure if I should go outside, unsure of anything at all. The car idled. Snow blew sideways across the lot. Both figures were silhouettes, their faces hidden by the glare of the headlights. Part 2 approximately equals 750 words. Instinct told me to lock the door, so I did. The click of the bolt echoed louder than it should have in the small space. The man outside froze, his back still to me, then slowly turned. His face, now illuminated by the car's beams, looked different, harder, sharper, as though the polite smile had been a mask. He reached for the handle and tugged. The door rattled but didn't open. The driver got out. Tall, hood up, movement slow but deliberate. He tried the other handle, pulling once, twice, then pressing his face close to the glass. I couldn't make out his features, only the pale glint of eyes under the hood. My heart hammered so loud I thought they could hear it. I ducked behind the counter and grabbed the phone, fingers trembling. Before dialing, I peeked over the register. The man was still at the door, pressing his palm flat against the glass now. His breath fogged a circle, but the fog lingered too long, as if the glass itself had chilled. He tilted his head at me, the same slow motion as before. A motionless tilt, like a clock hand. The driver's footsteps crunched in the snow. Around the back? No, he circled toward the pumps, glancing at the security cameras. My stomach dropped. Why weren't they leaving? I punched 911. The ringtone felt like it stretched forever. Outside, the man tapped the glass 3 times. A rhythm I didn't recognize. The sound was dull but deep, like knuckles against wood. The driver reappeared on the far side of the lot, still watching. 911, what's your emergency? I whispered my location, trying not to let my voice shake. The operator started asking questions, description, what they were doing, but my eyes were glued to the door.
Ow.
The man outside was smiling again, only now it reached his eyes, and the effect was worse. When they saw the phone at my ear, they both froze. Then, without a word, they turned. The man stepped back into the snow. The driver slid into the car. Headlights flicked off for a beat, plunging the lot into darkness, then back on. The engine revved, wheels spinning, snow spraying up like ash. They were gone, but I didn't move. The store felt different now, colder, heavier, like the air had thickened. The glass door still showed a faint circle of breath where his hand had been. Low groan filled the silence. The operator kept talking, but the line crackled like static washing over her voice. Sir? Sir? Are you still there? Yeah, I said. My voice sounded far away. They left. I think they left. A long pause. Then the line went dead. I lowered the phone. Outside, tire tracks already blurred under new snow. The highway beyond was empty. No headlights in either direction. Unlocked the door but didn't step out. The parking lot light flickered once, twice, then steadied. My own reflection in the glass looked pale, unfamiliar. I could still see a figure out by the pumps, just standing there, watching. I blinked, and it was gone. For the rest of my shift, no one came. no cars, no calls. When morning finally bled into the sky, pale and colorless, I stepped outside. The snow was untouched, no footprints at all leading to where the car had been. Only a faint circle on the glass, as if someone had pressed their hand there and never really left.